That's the fact about him. The stuff about Vernon is absolute bullshit. He's lying.
Well, he even went as far as saying to me that Vernon said to him, if you get the body out, don't bother with any of his jewelry, don't take his ring, and don't do anything to the body. I said, do you really expect me to believe that Vernon said that to you?
Elvis had no jewelry on.
Oh, didn't know that.
And Vernon knew it. The only ring he had on was the TCB ring, which they pulled before they put the casket lid down.
Ah, really?
Yeah. He was buried in a suit, no other jewelry, no shoes, just socks.
Oh, that's a good one. That blows that right out of the water.
Yeah. Also, if you look at the timeline that this guy is feeding, well, let me read you something that I meant to tell you about. I was in touch with I.C. Smith, who was a guy who dealt with this story in a book that he wrote. He's an FBI guy.
Mm.
And he was involved with a case with this guy named Billy Talley, who was, I think, with the sheriff's department down there.
Right.
And this is an email that the FBI guy sent me a little while ago. Not a little while ago, actually, a couple of years ago. Let me find it. Now, he talked to Atkins. And this guy told me, I'll quote you, he said, he never told me he met Presley's father. Indeed, he distinctly told me he had never met the father. And he also talked to Atkins' attorney at the time, who never mentioned the father either.
Well.
So this is, anything about the father is coming out after the fact, because he knows, here's an interesting thing. First of all, he knows that it makes a good story. Second of all, there's nobody out there to disprove him.
Exactly. Everybody's dead.
These dirtbag friends of his aren't going to come forward and say anything, or if they are, they're going to want a cut of whatever money that Atkins is going to get. Secondly, I would think that some people might not say anything, call him a liar, because of quotes like you just told me about putting a wire around somebody's neck.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that. From what I understand, this guy's a really big, intimidating guy.
He is.
But if you look at the timeline, like I was saying a few minutes ago about what happened with this thing, Vernon was distraught over Elvis's death. There was no question about moving Elvis's body. They had got the mausoleum, 2 days, over the course of the 2 days after Elvis died. He was put in the crypt. Nothing happened until after the break-in. Then Vernon went to the counselor, whoever in Memphis, tried to get the body moved, and they approved it. Well, they rejected it actually by a course of law, which is what they have to do. And then the next day, the attorney appealed it, and then it was unanimously approved by the board at the end of September.
So you're saying by the timeline, Vernon went to the zoning board after the 29th, because they tried to supposedly take the body on the 29th. So he went to the zoning board after that, got
Correct.
disapproved, and then got approved.
Right, and the only reason that it was rejected is because, forget that it's Elvis's family for a second, and just let's forget everything about who it is.
Okay.
When you going by the ordinance there, when you submit a request and the ordinance says that you're not allowed to do this, they reject it by law, because that's what they're supposed to do. The only way that you get approval for something that the ordinance does not allow is if you appeal it. You make your case, and then they decide one way or the other. It had to be rejected before they could appeal it.
Right.
Because there was no law in Memphis at the time allowing for bodies to be buried on private property, or on a family's property.
Well, I don't understand that. I mean, he says that's why Vernon had him do it, was because of the zoning.
Absolutely not. And I've talked to the guy who works in the records division down there.
Uh-huh.
There's no paperwork, no request before that. And in fact, I've looked at the ledger of expenses that the estate had after that, and the payments to Forest Hill started on, I think, the 2nd or the 4th or something of September for security payment all the way through October 3rd,
mm-hmm.
or October 2nd, whatever day it was. Now, why would Vernon be writing checks if Vernon was involved in it?
Right.
Vernon paid about $7,000 for, I think it was $200 a day that he paid to Forest Hill for security services around that crypt after the 29th. Now, if Vernon got Ronnie Atkins to break into that thing, why on earth would he be paying money for security?
I asked him that.
Because here's a really important point here, Joe. If Vernon knew about it, then he would know that he didn't have to pay security because the break-in was fake.
Right. I asked him that, and he said, well, the security was in on it.
Bullshit. Absolute lie.
Yeah.
That is a lie.
Well, do you believe, this is not about Ron Atkins, or now being known as Ron Tyler, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Was Dick Grob there that night or not?
Where?
At the Forest Hill, the night of the break-in, the attempted the hoax.
I cannot imagine why he would have been.
Well, reading his book, it sounds like he places himself there.
Well, Grob places himself everywhere. I'd have to go back and check, my records and what I've written on that. I kind of think maybe he did place himself there, like he was part of the team that got the tip-off.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you may be right. I can't imagine he was. Those guys were spooked by the cops. They ran down, I think it was Hernando, which runs north to south on the west side of the cemetery.
Right.
They turned right on Person Avenue, and they got arrested at the intersection of Elvis Presley Boulevard. It was a very quick, run-of-the-mill arrest.
Mm-hmm.
For a bunch of idiots who were out doing stupid things late on a Sunday night.
So what do you think it was just like 3 or 4 guys who were drunk decided, no, let's go see Elvis Presley at Forest Hill, and they do, and they get arrested, and Ron Atkins just spun a good yarn?
Yeah, my personal belief is that it doesn't matter. A lot of people look at this and saying, well, these guys got arrested, but one of the guys was a police informant. Well, so what? Police informants don't suddenly turn good just because they're police informants. They still do stupid things. If you look at these guys back then, obviously all of them were losers who didn't have jack going for them. They were probably on drugs. They were certainly drinking. Mm-hmm. And they were out messing around doing stupid things, and they got caught. And then after the fact, then they're like, oh, well, let's try to create a story out of this. Mm-hmm. Now, there is the issue of Billy Talley, who was the deputy, the worked in the sheriff's office. Now, there's a story there that he conspired with Atkins to do this break-in, and that Talley is the one who turned on Atkins, got them busted, thinking that, oh, I would go back to Vernon and say, hey, look, I saved your son's body from getting stolen, and maybe Vernon would pay him off or something, give him some money. Mm-hmm. Hey, here's a $50,000 check. Thanks for doing that. But now I've talked to one of the guys who was at the mansion for that week following the death, and was with Vernon all the time, and he says all of that is absolute nonsense. Vernon never would have been involved in anything that crazy.
Yeah, I mean, he also said to me that they were actually planning on stealing the body right from the mortuary on the 16th. And I went,
right.
Huh?
Well, see, here's an interesting point about that, is that if he says that, then he is betraying his own story, because if he's saying that they were going to steal the body on the 29th because Vernon asked them to, if they were going to go back to the funeral home and steal the body on the 16th, that means Vernon had nothing to do with it.
Exactly.
Vernon couldn't have told anybody on the 16th. He was at the mansion all day long, mm-hmm. all night long, with family and friends.
Yep, never left it.
He didn't go out meeting anybody. And if they were going to steal the body, then on the 16th they already had that idea in their head.
Right.
And I believe it could have been hatched that night. Hey, let's go down and do something crazy. And then it wasn't until 2 weeks later that they had a couple beers and said, well, let's go do it tonight. Mm-hmm. So Atkins' own story, own claims, contradict his other claims. Well, and when you got somebody contradicting their own claims, it means they're lying.
Well, when I told him about up through the years, because Lee and I, we've been going crazy looking at old newspapers and about this. Every time this man tells his story, it's different.
Right, and I think that you've probably looked through my book a bit and maybe read what I wrote about.
Got it right next to me here.
And if you look through all the newspaper articles and all the stories about this, every single one of them is different, and when you set them side by side, they make no sense.
Well, he blames it on the newspaper people. He says they wrote it down wrong.
Who, Atkins said that?
Yeah.
Oh, what a load of crap! God, I'm surprised that he's sticking to that. That's really, really surprising. But I have the records of the zoning records, and they're quite clear on the way this thing played out. There was no way that anything was going on before the 29th.
Well,
and as I said, Vernon started paying the security at the beginning of September.
Well, I'm surprised that he didn't even think about it a little bit better, because they say how they climbed a wall at Forest Hill. There is no wall at Forest Hill. There's like a 3-foot wall in the front of Forest Hill, and there's a fence that goes all the way around the rest of it.
Well, I think that if you look at, a topographic look at that property.
Got it right
on
here.
On the west side, I think it's Hernando, and I believe that they said I think they said a couple different things. They climbed that fence there, or there was a hole in the fence there, and then they were going to carry the casket out of there through the hole and put it in the car. Now, obviously, if they climb the fence, they can't get the casket back over the fence. Secondly, as the guy from the deputy's office that I talked to said, that thing was behind 2 different slabs of marble.
Right.
It was sealed in that thing. And let's just forget all the why was the casket weigh so much. The fact of the matter, it was a heavy casket, and then you've got a body inside of it. Those guys, and I'm sure you've been in that crypt, there's no way that the 4 guys would even fit in there to lift the thing out.
No, yeah.
And if you got 12 guys at the funeral, busting ass trying to move the thing, well, certainly these 4 idiots couldn't do it.
Yeah, it's true.
And, there's a little lift. If you go into that mausoleum, sometimes you can see it. There's a hydraulic lift that they use to lift caskets up. Now, that thing could have been sitting around, but you would have had to have known that the thing was there, and you would have to know how to operate it.
Well, how far did they get? Did they get inside of the mausoleum at all, or were they caught at the door?
I believe that they got caught while they were, I think, probably rattling or messing around with the gate, the door gate going into the actual crypt. Now, it's also possible they got caught trying to get into the door of the mausoleum, which now, as you know, is never closed. But then, since it was 2 weeks after Elvis's body was put there, they may have locked those doors. But now, it's open 24 hours a day.
Right. I was talking to one of the managers at the Forest Hill when I was in Memphis this year, and they said that when they tried to do this, the stealing of the body, that they damaged the gate on the front of the mausoleum, and it's still damaged to this day. But I don't know if that's really true or not.
Now, when he says gate, does he mean the thing going into the crypt?
Going into the crypt.
Okay. That's possibly true. I mean, the gate is still there. But it still locks.
So did they have any equipment on them at all?
There's no indication that they had any tools with them, and even if they did, they certainly didn't know what they were doing. Because let's look at the facts here. They went to do this thing. Let's say they did have the tools. The claims are that they had X number of tools. That if you look at what those tools be used for, they certainly couldn't have been used to lift a casket out of a crypt bed that's about 4 to 5 feet off the ground.
Right. One of the newspapers says a shovel and a pitchfork.
Yeah, they didn't have the tools to do this. And, this goes also back to the ransom thing, is that, there's claims that they were going to be paid ransom to do this from some unidentified guy. Well, if you're going to get somebody to go steal a casket, maybe you ought to get guys who know what the hell they're doing. Yeah. And not these 4 bozos who didn't know what they were doing. And I don't believe that they had tools. Or if they did, they just had some stupid crap, and they didn't know what they were getting into. If they had actually had the strength or the means to pull that casket out of that crypt bed, what would have happened is it would have tipped over on top of them.
Killed somebody.
Yeah, and it would have fallen and probably opened when it hit the floor. And that would have been a mess.
Oh, it certainly would have been. There was also another another paper that I was reading. It said somehow it came up. Someone said they might even had explosives.
That's one of the articles too. I don't know if I can't remember if it was a newspaper or where it was, but one of the people who wrote it said they had M1 rifles or whatever, carbines.
Yeah.
They were packing grenades.
Dressed in black.
All that stuff.
Dressed in black.
It's like what on earth would they be doing with all that stuff, trying to break into a mausoleum?
Oh, is this all coming from Ron Atkins? All these stories?
I don't think so. I think a lot of this stuff may have. I don't know what the sources are, because these were all legitimate news sources that these stories came from. Most of these aren't, from Joe Smith on the street. These are newspaper articles that came out. Now, when you look at the crazier ones, or the ones that are really off the mark, you're like, what are your sources for that? And I would like to find the guy, whoever wrote the story, excuse me, about the grenades and wearing black and military uniforms or whatever, and say, who told you that? Because that's insane. Well, and certainly that would have been in the police report, and the police would have commented on that if these guys were really found to have that kind of thing.
Well, I asked them how they were going to get paid, and he says I guess all three of them were going to get $40,000 each. And
from who?
From Vernon.
Oh my God.
And
so let me, Joe, let me just interrupt. Let me go back to what I was saying.
Okay.
So Vernon wants this body, his son's casket, stolen, right?
Right.
He doesn't get Dick Grob or anybody to do it under the cover of night with a mask on his face, who might be able to put something like that together. No, he finds 4 delinquent losers, agrees to pay them a total of $120,000, which we all know Vernon wouldn't have done because he was such a penny pincher.
True.
Sends them out there on a summer night. They're immediately arrested, running away, and they have no tools and no means to complete the job. And he really wants us to believe that Vernon was going to pay for that.
Right.
That is absolutely absurd.
Well, I asked him, look, I'll even give you a break. I mean, maybe I'll be a believer if you can prove it to me. Give some kind of proof. Well, Vernon, this is what Ron said. Vernon sent me a telegram thanking me for helping him. I says, oh, there you go. Can I see a copy of the telegram? Oh, my lawyer's got it. So
yeah, I'll bet. Who's his lawyer?
Actually, he gave me his name. I don't know if I want to say it out. I'll give it to you after. Hey, since I got you here, what's going on in the Elvis is Alive stuff?
Well, I'm waiting for this Eliza case to come to court, which is still floating around. They can't get their story together. Bradley for Lisa Marie has filed, a motion to dismiss, and they're preparing an answer to it. So it's still floating around. Nothing's happened.
Is there really a chance that she might be a family?
Absolutely not. No way.
I feel sorry for Lisa Marie and the Presley family for being constantly bothered.
Yeah, I've talked to Eliza's mother quite a bit about this, and there's no way it's true. It's absolutely it's crazy. And she's got a long history of serious personal problems.
Yeah.
She's got a criminal record. She's got. I talked to. Let me see if I can get this straight. I talked to her adoptive brother's former wife and former niece, who said that she has been caught stealing identities before too.
Mm-hmm.
So she's got a long history of just doing a lot of bad things, and so no, she's not related.
Mm. Well,
these pat responses that she's, these canned responses that she's been using for years, but she can't answer questions either. And if people are afraid to answer questions, that means they're afraid to give the answers. She
was down in Memphis while I was down there, and I saw people run across the street to get her autograph. I almost puked.
That is why this case has gone on so long, because she is accepting financial support from the people who believe her, because she is unemployed and unemployable, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
She cannot get or hold a job, and that's why this thing has taken so long, is because she's milking it for all that she can. She was in talks with some dude thinking that she was going to get a $5 to $10 million payday from this story, and I believe this court case was filed for the simple and sole reason was to support the story, to say, hey, look, I must be telling the truth. I filed this lawsuit. That's got to be a good part of the story.
Right.
And that she has no expectations of winning this thing at all, and that she just wanted it in the courts because it'll make a good part of her story.
Yeah.
And if it gets thrown out, see, this is the thing about these little scammers that is really convenient for them. If it gets thrown out, all she's got to do is go to her supporters and say, see, they didn't rule against me. They just threw it out.
Right.
Because Lisa Marie has so much power in Memphis, and they didn't want me to, rock the boat and blah, blah, blah. So, see, I'm still Vernon's daughter, so, keep sending me money.
And the truth is they kept delaying and delaying and delaying.
Yeah, and then what they do is they leave it as an open-ended question so that her supporters will never know the truth. And that's the way she wants it and I've thought about if I knew where her legal residence was, and I know where she lives now, and I know where she uses as her address, but I don't know her legal residence, that somebody needs to go to that state and say, this woman is accepting money. Has she registered as a charity?
Mm-hmm.
Because if she hasn't, then she's evading taxes.
She's even got a website, and it's a professionally done website.
Well, the last time I checked her website, it was not there.
Oh, I swear to God, I was just on it a week ago.
Unless she changed it. What was the address?
I just put it in, and it came up Eliza something. Eliza Presley.
She had ElizaPresley.org.
Yeah.
When I checked it last, it was not active.
Ron was telling me that he's doing a book and looking at a movie deal.
See? That's what these people do, is they come up with this nonsense and they want to sell it. If anybody gives that guy money for a book or a movie, they've got rocks in their heads.
Well, what scares me is he's got a lawyer that goes with him on radio interviews, and if he was going to go through the interview with me, I had to do it through his lawyer. What is this, a crooked lawyer?
Yeah, and that is a protective tool for somebody who's afraid that they can answer a question wrong and ruin their story.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're afraid of.
Wow. So when would you like to do it? Maybe next weekend, and they'll give me a week to get all my questions together. And
yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I think it'll be interesting.
Yeah. ElizaPresley.org now goes to just a website of the person who created her website. And I might also note that they have a TCB emblem there, which they're using without copyright permission.
Maybe it was a little longer than that, but I swear I was just on it maybe a couple of weeks ago.
I think it was about a week ago that I checked this, and it was down.
All right.
So
I was surprised she even had it. I was really surprised.
Well, she rarely updated it. There was nothing of substance there, and anything that you wanted to read, you had to register for. So
that's
I think
right.
She's probably, I don't know if she might still be doing her Twitter account, or I don't know what she does, but she's nuts.
Well, how about the same time next Saturday?
What's the date next Saturday? Do you know?
No. Well, just tell me through the week and.
Yeah, let me get a good time.
Yeah.
I don't know what I got on tap for next week. I'll just email you early in the week and let you know.
And I'll basically do the same thing. Tell you how I was going to interview him. It fell apart because he doesn't want to ask any questions, and because I don't believe him. Basically, what we did.
Right.
Okay.
and we'll just do it a little bit more formally, I guess.
Yeah. All right, buddy. Take care.
Okay, Joe.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
This is Joe Krein from Elvis2001.net, and we're on Elvis Express Radio, and we have Patrick Lacy. Hey, Patrick, how you doing?
I'm good, Joe. How are you?
Good. Hey, Patrick, can we first start off, could you tell me where you're from?
I am from Virginia. I live right outside Washington, D.C., and have lived here for many, many years.
And what do you do for a living?
I am in the computer networking field.
Mm-hmm. When did you write the book Elvis Decoded?
I started writing the book, not really writing the book per se, but putting together research for the book in about 95 and 96. And as information and analyses and such started amassing, it kind of seemed that a book was somewhere down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started really putting it into book form over the past 4 or 5 years.
So what is Elvis Decoded? I mean, if you wanted to tell somebody, what is Elvis Decoded?
Elvis Decoded is an attempt to take information that I believe is largely misleading, misconstrued, misunderstood, misinterpreted, wrong,
mm-hmm.
and sort through it and see what it all means and try to figure out what is right and what is wrong, what is myth, what is fact, because there are a lot of issues and topics and questions in Elvis world that just lay out there, and people don't do anything about them. They don't think about them. Rumors become facts, and I think people 30 years after Elvis's death should look at the information and try to really get the nuts and bolts of what kind of person he was and what the truth about him was, because there's going to be a time coming up soon where there aren't going to be a lot of people left to talk about Elvis.
You're right. They're going to be gone.
That might be a little morbid to say, but and I think people need to look at the facts and get a clear, well-rounded picture of the man and not the myth.
Well, Elvis has been gone a very long time. I mean, are these people just getting on in years, that they're making mistakes with what happened? I mean, you looking at Elvis Decoded, there's people looking at the same event, and they got different information. Are some people just making mistakes? Are they lying? What's going on?
It's very hard to say, because there are instances in the book where I look at a claim by a very reputable source, and then I look at the same, a claim about the same topic that's the polar opposite of that claim by another reputable source. So you've got two reputable sources saying the exact opposite thing. And again, I hate to pick a morbid topic, but this is an interesting one, is there's been questions, did Elvis have a cranial autopsy? Was his head
right?
Autopsy? Larry Geller saw Elvis's head at the morgue. He says there was not one. People who were in the autopsy suite performing the autopsy say there was one. And then Bob Kendall, who was the mortician or the director at Memphis Funeral Home, says that there was not a cranial autopsy. So you look at that and you say, how do all these people saw the body? There's no reason that any of them would lie, and yet you've got exactly opposite claims about something that should be fairly obvious. It's not like, a cranial autopsy is a fairly intrusive procedure. It's not like you're not going to notice it. But for Geller and Kendall to specifically say this was not performed runs exactly counter to the people who were in the autopsy suite doing the procedure.
Well, it's funny that you would even talk about that, because that's what I did for a living. And when you did autopsies, you didn't always do that.
Well, it's my understanding that the cranial autopsy was done because you run down the line of things that you do in an autopsy, and they got to the point where they weren't finding an obvious cause of death.
Right.
The pathology was not leading them down a certain road, so they said, well, we need to go one more step, and that happened to have been the next step.
Right. And if it was a pathologist that I was working with, we would have done one. Because of all these questions, did he die of this? Was it a heart problem? The drug question came up.
Yeah, if somebody is in an autopsy suite and they've got a bullet hole in them, you don't do a cranial autopsy because you've already pinpointed the bullet hole.
Exactly. But if somebody is found dead on the floor in his bathroom, you would do one.
Right, especially if you're not finding the answers that you're looking for.
Exactly.
And there was no cardiac evidence that he had had a heart attack or anything like that. So they just kept looking, and I think that was the natural progression of the autopsy to say, okay, we've exhausted these options, let's go to that option. So it's not unusual that it would have been done, given the fact that they weren't finding the information they were looking for.
So if it was done, why would they say it wasn't done? You think just so fans would not have that in their head for the rest of their life, that they violated the king?
See, that's a very, very tricky question, because like you hear comments on the Y incision in the chest,
right,
made by I don't remember if it was Geller or Kendall or both, but if they're going to say something like that, why would they deny the cranial autopsy? They've already said something that's going to leave an impression in fans' minds,
right?
So why not just say the rest of it? The people in the autopsy suite who are performing this, I can't imagine. I mean, they're disinterested parties. I don't know why they would make a claim that wasn't accurate, considering also that you've got 8, 10, 12 people in the autopsy suite. If you say something blatantly wrong, somebody's going to correct you and say, hey, wait a minute, that wasn't done.
Right.
I've talked to people who were in the autopsy suite. They said it was done. There wasn't even an issue about it.
Yeah, and that's a lot of people in a room for to where you're going to do an autopsy. And the only reason is because it was Elvis Presley.
Yeah, I think there was some fear, I think, in the Cole and Thompson book talk about this, I think, where, they didn't want a JFK situation
Yeah.
Where things just got botched and there was a bunch of questions and things looked bad, which ironically is what happened.
It is exactly what happened. There was 40 people in that room. Hey, is Elvis Presley alive?
No.
Well,
if anybody has evidence to show that, I'd be more than glad to look at it. I've yet to see one piece that is compelling enough to consider that idea.
Would you mind telling me what the Elvis Presley Commission is?
The Presley Commission was a group of people formed by, I think, Phil Acheson and Bill Beanie and Debbie Wines and maybe Gail Brewer-Giorgio had a hand in that, and probably a couple other people who put together this group to investigate Elvis's hoax to death. Then interesting that through the Presley report that they put out, they're always saying we're trying to protect Elvis, and yet in the same book they're trying to reveal what he did.
Exactly.
So I'm not really sure how that worked out, but
yeah. Whether they say that he's in the witness protection, and that we don't want anything to happen to him, so we're not going to tell you everything that we know. Well, why do you even say that he's alive if he's in a witness protection program?
If these folks wanted to protect Elvis, they wouldn't have put this silly commission together in the first place.
Yeah, I've talked to Bill Beanie, and the man he has no idea what's going on. I mean, he says this, that, and the other thing, and I know these things have been put to rest. Well, we know that that's not Elvis next to Muhammad Ali. It's been said who that person is. This person has come forward and said, that is me.
I think that Bill Beanie, and I'm not saying, I don't know what his intentions are, but he's either willfully ignorant or he just doesn't have a grasp of what the realities here are. Because if you read through his commentary and his books, you'll see that he takes the standard Gail Brewer-Giorgio line on a lot of this stuff. He takes the myth line that you read on Elvis's Alive websites, and he runs with it. And a lot of this stuff has been debunked years and years ago, before Bill Beanie even got involved in this stuff. And yet he sticks to the party line with the Elvis's Alive group. And that shows a serious disingenuousness to him that makes you question why he's doing what he's doing. Although he's not doing it anymore because he sold the museum.
Now, why would a man like Bill Beanie have DNA that belonged to Elvis Presley?
I would like to know that question, answer that question too, because he spins a tale about how those tissue samples were obtained. His co-conspirator, who's Phil Acheson, spins an exact opposite story to that, and one of them is lying, or both of them are lying, but both of them are not telling the truth.
Now, I asked him why he had Elvis's DNA, and he says, I'm protecting somebody, so I can't tell you. Well, that's an easy way to get it. I mean, come on now. He sounds like a politician.
Yeah, Phil Acheson says that they found this doctor in Memphis, and they directed him to the samples at Baptist Memorial. Bill Beanie says that the doctor provided these samples to them and had already had them in his possession, and that he got them from Harold Sexton. I just don't buy Beanie's story. It doesn't make sense. Also, he would be asking us to believe that Harold Sexton kept 2 sets of autopsy materials and tissue samples, because we know from the Cole Thompson book that he gave one set to Jim Cole. So Bill Beanie wants us to think that Sexton took 2 sets of this material, and that's just, it's not possible.
Right. Now, Gail Brewer, I'd love to be able to interview her. I've tried to track her down. I cannot. She could not have asked for better promotion for Orion, a book that wasn't doing anything.
Right.
It seems like this is how she sold Orion, was the Elvis conspiracy that Elvis is not dead. I mean, she couldn't have asked for better publicity for her book that was doing nothing. And now Orion, you can't even find the book. It's done so well.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what Gail's motivation was.
Do you think it was just to sell Orion?
It's really hard to say, because the things that she did don't really go with the notion that she was trying to be overly successful with the thing. And then when she put out the books that she put out, they're all almost the same. He really hasn't done any new research in probably more than a decade, if not more than that. So I'm not really sure what her angle was.
Right. It's just a different cover. Yeah, when you get the book. Yeah.
Same commentary. I mean, it's almost word for word, I think, in some parts.
Yeah. Hey, what happened on August the 16th, 1977? I've heard so many different. Now, that's what Elvis Decoded should help the reader, right? I mean, who found Elvis?
It's my understanding that Ginger found Elvis, as the story goes. I mean, when you look at Graceland, the activities from about noon on that day till Elvis's body was removed from the property. There's a lot of variations and a lot of different claims here and there. Who was where? Who was doing what? Who answered the phone? Who made the call? Etc. I believe that Ginger found the body. She called downstairs. Al and Joe came up, and the sequence of events happened as we've been told it happened. Mm-hmm. I don't see any evidence that there's anything. There's no red flags when I look at the described scenario. Now, there are differences in descriptions of what happened, and there are different accounts, which tells me somebody is right and somebody's wrong, or they're both wrong and they've both, dropped the ball on it. But I don't see anything glaring about the sequence of events that day, generally speaking.
Right. And some of the things are just ridiculous. What colored pajamas did he have on? Who cares?
But the reason that I put the pajama question in the book, for one reason, to show people who read the book how easily people can get facts wrong. And you've got X number of eyewitnesses who were in that bathroom, who saw the body being removed, who saw him at the hospital, wherever. And yet you've got so many different claims about the color of the pajamas, the color of the pajama top, the pajama bottom, what fabric the pajamas were, was he wearing a shirt, was he not, were the pajamas down, were they up, all this kind of thing. And you're thinking, how can so many people get one ridiculous fact so wrong?
Right.
And yet somebody did.
Right. Now, do you see a lot of people put themselves in in the most important position?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
You get the impression that David Stanley was kind of putting himself in a take charge kind of position. Joe Esposito puts himself in that position, which is more believable because he kind of was in that position anyway. But nothing I think egregious, nothing that's too much. I think it's just the way that those guys were.
Right.
Positions in Elvis's life. And it wasn't just that day. I mean, you can go back, 10, 20 years, and a lot of those guys were putting themselves in that position as well.
Oh, sure. They still do it. I'm surprised that some of them haven't said that they weren't there when Elvis was born.
Yeah.
Hey, who is Bill Miller?
Bill Miller is a gentleman out in Las Vegas who is claiming to be, or to have been, Elvis's best buddy and private investigator and someone who spied on Graceland and the Memphis Mafia and that type of thing.
Now, you and we've had discussions about this before.
Yeah.
And I'm not really sure how much that you want to talk about it. You want to wait until his book comes out. Do you know when that'll be out?
I've heard different dates and different time frames. I thought that it was supposed to be out by the end of the year. I heard the other day that it was delayed. So I don't know what the story is there.
Now, I was supposed to interview him, and he kept getting put off, and I was finding things. They sent me like a packet. This proves who I am, and, well, you and I have talked about it, and It seems like a lot of that packet can be just destroyed with just facts.
I've looked at a lot of his documentation that he claims support his story. And there's nothing there that says I knew Elvis in any shape or form, much less in the capacity that I claim. Nothing.
Right.
And I suspect that what is going to be in his book is going to be these documents that he's posted on his website and such, that he's using a circumstantial evidentiary pattern to say, A plus B equals C, this and this and this, therefore I must have known Elvis. But that doesn't stand up anymore. You got to prove that you knew Elvis and that you were in the positions that you say you were in. there was a big interview with him on EIN a while back, and they talk about, he says he was on the grounds in Graceland and he played with Lisa Marie and this, that, and the other. None of it stands up. And I've analyzed it all over the place, and it just doesn't stand up.
Right. Right. A lot of the documentation that I've looked at, I mean, like the one where the colonel said, I remember you and you were a good old boy, that type of thing, and then he signed it at the bottom with what looks like a signature that the colonel would have given a fan.
Right, and a gigantic magic marker.
Yeah, and a gigantic magic marker.
Well, if you read through the documentation that he has, the tone and the language and the feel of these testimonial letters are all kind of the same. Billy, you were a great guy. Elvis loved you. You looked after him. Way to go. Here's this letter to prove who you were. It was from Mike McGregor, and I think Mary Jenkins wrote him something. I don't remember the content of that off the top of my head, though. But,
right.
The Sinatra letter, which, as you know, they got the date on the thing wrong.
Right.
All this stuff, it's the same type of letter. And it almost sounds to me like the same person is writing them.
Do you think he wrote them?
I believe somebody that he knows wrote them. And it wasn't Elvis or Frank Sinatra or Mike McGregor or Mary Jenkins.
Yeah. Now, let me get on the other side for a minute. Is it possible that his story is true?
No.
No. Okay. I'd have to say that I don't believe it either.
I've looked. Some people have come to me and said, you're too hard on Billy Miller, and you're too critical of him, and this type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've got no personal thing about Billy Miller. I don't even know the guy. But when he makes, this claim and this claim and this claim, I'm going to analyze them, and I'm going to see what the facts turn out to be. I've researched his story and the claims that he made extensively, not just reading over them and seeing if I agree with them or not. I mean, I've researched them. And nothing that he has said stands up. Nothing. Not one thing. So if somebody says, here are 100 pieces of evidence that I am who I say I am, and yet not one of the pieces of evidence stands up, you have to reach the conclusion that the person's lying. And that's where the evidence takes us. This isn't a situation of, I don't like Billy Miller, so I'm going to find him wrong or incorrect or lying or whatever. This is what the evidence shows. I've talked, for instance, he told me one time that he ran some undercover investigations in Virginia for the Virginia State Police.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to the head of the Virginia State Police of that investigations unit who was there through the entire 70s. He said, I've never heard of Billy Miller. I know who Elvis Presley is, but I never met him because, Billy says that Elvis was with him on these things. And the guy was just stunned that I would even ask him such weird questions.
Right.
And yet Billy Miller said that's what he did. And the notion that Elvis Presley went on undercover police raids with somebody is preposterous.
Right. No, he'd only stop on the side of a street to stop the fight.
Right. I mean, a lot of people also miss the business angle of this. If Parker knew that Elvis was doing things like that, he would have had a meltdown. People who insured Elvis
sure
would have said, Elvis, you can't go out on police investigations.
Sure.
That's insane, So just keeping it very simple here, I've never seen anything of Miller's that can stand up.
Yeah.
And I hope that fans take a little bit of time before they jump on that bandwagon and say, is this guy really telling the truth, and is this stuff possible? Because I don't believe that it is.
It's almost like they're looking for another, I hate to say hero, but another person that was there.
Well, I hate to use the word desperate, and when I use the word desperate, I'm not saying anything critical about Elvis fans.
Mm-hmm.
However, I believe that there's almost a desperate feel that, hey, we need something new. All these avenues of information and the Memphis Mafia writing books and this, that, and the other, those have all been exhausted. We need something that makes us get closer to this man, and it's new, and it's exciting, and that kind of feel. They're desperate for something because they want more, and the supply is running out. And I think that Miller, and maybe even, Joe Hansen isn't a good example, but some of these people who've come up with these crazy claims, Bill Beanie even, is that these people want to latch onto it, not because they're already accepting these claims as truth, but they want to see what the story is because they want that extra, they want that new story. rush of, adrenaline or whatever that says, okay, we've got something new in Elvis world. And, I've heard people just the other day said to me, well, I'm going to give, Billy Miller the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to buy his book. And my opinion of that is, well, if you buy the book, you've already committed your money to him. And then if you decide that he's not telling the truth after the book, he wins and you lose.
Exactly.
Because that's the point in writing a book, for these folks, is they want to get the money, and if you're going to give somebody like Miller the benefit of the doubt without looking at a story first, then I don't know. I just don't think that's very smart.
I was contacted a few months back by somebody. They told me that there was a rumor going around that the break-in to steal the body at the cemetery was actually staged by Vernon Presley and, Dick Grob, or Dick Grob at least knows about it. Now, I'm good friends with Dick Grob, and he just kind of really poo-pooed that off, You have information of that inside Elvis Decoded?
Yeah, I look at that story quite a bit. The context of the way that I look at it is taking all the different claims and comparing them and analyzing them, and it's fairly obvious that not much matches up. That all the people who have written about that story have varying facts that, border on something that's just made up. The guys in the cemetery wearing bulletproof vests and carrying grenades and things like that. Then you've got other stories where these guys were just a bunch of losers hanging out doing a drug deal. You've got all these different stories, and you're like, God, where did this stuff come from? I don't believe that the break-in even happened.
You don't?
I don't believe that there was an attempt to do that. I don't believe anything about it. Vernon Presley could have easily gotten any zoning changes that he wanted. He just had to wait for them, like anybody else. The Presley name had a lot of power in Memphis then, as it does now. And the notion that Elvis, or that Vernon, wasn't going to get that zoning change or permission or whatever he needed is silly. Of course he was going to get it. Why plot this whole thing to get something that you know you're going to be able to get anyway?
Because he wanted it now.
Yeah, because you've got 13 acres of land there. There's plenty of precedent for human beings being buried on private property. Why would Elvis be any different? All Vernon had to do was go to the big cheeses in Memphis and say, I want you guys to zone this so that I can bury my son there and move my deceased wife there. And they would have said, okay, give us a week or whatever. The notion that they put this big plot together is absolutely ridiculous. And this Truth About Elvis movie that's supposed to be coming out.
Yeah.
Those guys claim that one of the Ronnie Lee Atkins, who was supposedly the mastermind of this whole thing, put this thing together, and he said that he met with Vernon to stage the thing. And I think that is, I don't even have a comment on that until I see the interview, but that is just, I'm not buying that.
Well, Vernon was so frail, and Vernon went nowhere without somebody being with him, and many times it was Dick Grob and somebody.
Well, an interesting point here, though, is that Atkins, I think, claims, or has claimed in his varying changes of his story, that they were going to try to steal the body from the Memphis funeral home the night of the 16th. Well, if he met with Vernon to plot this thing, as he now says, that means that Elvis was pronounced dead at about 3:30. Vernon found out about 4 o'clock, and that sometime after 4 o'clock that day, on the day that his son died, he was meeting in some parking lot with some police informant to try to plot a faked staging of a body theft.
It just doesn't sound.
I don't think Vernon was going out and doing that.
No, Vernon was just devastated.
Yeah, and I think if you stick with the story that this theft happened, 2 weeks or so after Elvis's death, if he met with Vernon somewhere in there, well, that's a ridiculous story too, but at least it gives him 2 weeks to meet with Vernon. But if Atkins sticks with his claim that he had gone to they were going to go to the Memphis funeral home for this, then he has to somehow put himself with Vernon Presley in a parking lot talking about this the evening of the 16th.
Yeah.
And that is just impossible.
Patrick, will there be a Elvis Decoded #2?
I'm doing a lot of research right now, and I had initially said that there would not be an Elvis Decoded 2, but I'm kicking around the idea, depending on what happens with some of the research that I'm doing right now.
Right.
I do know that regardless of what I decide to do with it, if I don't pursue a second book, I'll be putting the stuff on my webpage.
Yeah, and what is your website?
Boy, off the top of my head.
It's hell to get old.
Well, I'm keeping a blog going now, which I'm just doing some updates and stuff on, which is Elvis-Decoded.blogspot.com, where I'm just following up on some things and adding some new commentary on some issues.
Mm-hmm.
If fans want to go there and read that, I'll post the homepage there.
Okie doke. And I think there's a link on Elvis2001.net.
Yeah, and Elvis-Decoded.com, which takes you to where the book is sold. There's a link to my webpage there too. The webpage is just where I go over what the book is about, and I have some commentary on Miller and Paul Terry King and some other stuff.
Okay.
Okay.
Patrick, I'd like to thank you for doing this for Elvis2001.net and Elvis Express Radio.
Glad to do it, Joe.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
All right,